Thunder cracked across the darkening sky as Queen Uloma stood before the ancient Iroko tree, her hand raised in sacred oath. The entire village held their breath. "If I know what happened to Prince Chike, may thunder strike me." Her voice rang clear across the market square. For a moment, silence. Some villagers began to nod, she must be innocent. But as Uloma turned to leave, a blinding bolt of lightning tore through the sky. Crack! The thunder struck her so violently that her body convulsed and collapsed, smoke rising from where she fell. "Ha ha ha ha! Iki! We did it! I was involved!" The chief priest suddenly screamed, scratching his head wildly, his eyes rolling back. His laughter echoed madness. "No!" Mademoiselle shrieked, clawing at her own face. "The gods! The gods have found us out!" The crowd gasped in horror. They were guilty! But where was the prince? Before we unveil this incredible tale of betrayal, divine justice, and miraculous return, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. Now, let us begin. In the heart of the ancient Igbo kingdom of Umuna, there lived a king named Ebube, the Glory. He was known throughout the land as a man of honor, a king who loved justice more than gold, and truth more than power. King Ebube had married Queen Ifeoma when they were both young. Her name meant a good thing, and to him, she was everything good in this world. She had eyes that sparkled like the morning dew on fresh leaves, and a laugh that could make even the sternest elder smile. The king loved her with a devotion that became legendary, so much so that he made a private vow never to take a second wife, though their culture not only permitted but encouraged polygamy. But as the seasons changed and the years passed, Queen Ifeoma's womb remained silent, empty. One afternoon, King Ebube stood hidden behind a pillar, watching Ifeoma in the palace garden. She was tending to the flowers, humming a lullaby, a song meant for children she didn't have. A group of village children ran past the garden wall, their laughter floating over like tiny daggers. Ifeoma's hands froze on a rosebud. Her shoulders began to shake. The king watched as his beloved wife, his queen, collapsed among the flowers, pressing her hand against her empty womb, weeping silently so no one would hear. His own tears fell then, hot and bitter. What kind of king was he if he couldn't protect his wife from this pain? What kind of man if he couldn't give her the one thing she longed for? That evening, as Ifeoma walked through the market to return to the palace, she passed a group of women gathered by the well. Their voices carried clearly in the evening air. 7 years now, and still no child, one woman whispered, but loud enough for Ifeoma to hear. "The gods have rejected her. That is why her womb is cursed," another added, shaking her head. "Poor King Ebube, a great man suffering because of a barren woman. If he doesn't take another wife soon, who will inherit his throne?" Ifeoma's steps quickened, but she couldn't outrun the words. They followed her like shadows. By the time she reached her chambers, her chest was tight with shame and grief. She looked at herself in the bronze mirror, still beautiful, still young enough. But what good was beauty without fruit? What good was a queen who could not produce an heir? She touched her reflection, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she whispered to the gods. "Why do you punish me? What have I done?" Meanwhile, in the darkest corner of the kingdom, under the massive Iroko tree, where no one dared venture after nightfall, 2 figures met in secret. Madame Nne, the most troublesome and ambitious woman in Umuna, clutched a small leather pouch as she approached the chief priest. Her daughter Uloma stood behind her, beautiful and young, with calculating eyes that mirrored her mother's ambition. "Oracle," Nne greeted him with exaggerated reverence. "You sent for us?" The chief priest, called the Oracle by the people, smiled a snake's smile. He was draped in white cloth, stained with red clay and chalk marks, his eyes perpetually bloodshot from drinking too much palm wine and inhaling ritual smoke. Cowrie shells and bones hung from his neck, clicking together like whispered warnings. "The time has come," the chief priest said, his voice raspy. "The king grows desperate. The elders pressure him daily. He will soon take a second wife." Nne's eyes gleamed with greed. and you will make sure that wife is my Uloma. Of course, but there is one problem. The chief priest pulled out a small clay pot. Queen Ifeoma. As long as she remains the king's favorite, as long as there is hope she might conceive, your daughter will always be second. We must ensure she never bears a child. What is that? Uloma asked, pointing at the pot. A portion, very powerful, mixed from the roots of the twisted baobab tree, the blood of a stillborn goat, and ash from a mother's grave. When taken monthly, it ensures barrenness. I give it to the queen every month during the royal ritual, disguised as a blessing from the gods. Azina cackled, a sound like dried leaves scraping stone. Brilliant, and she has no idea? None. She trusts me completely. The king trusts me. They all do. His smile widened. They call me the Oracle. They think I speak for the gods. But I speak only for myself, and for those who make it worth my while. Azine reached into her wrapper and pulled out a heavy pouch that clinked with cowries and bronze coins. Here, and there will be more when Uloma becomes queen. Much more. The chief priest weighed the pouch in his hand, satisfied. Then we are in agreement. Continue to be patient. Soon, very soon, your daughter will wear the crown. 1 month later, the pressure on King Ebube had become unbearable. The council of elders called meeting after meeting. The chief priest's warnings grew more dire with each monthly ritual. Your Highness, the chief priest intoned one morning after giving the king and queen their portions, I must speak with you privately. The matter is urgent. Queen Ifeoma excused herself, though the king saw the pain flash across her face. When they were alone, the chief priest knelt with exaggerated concern. My king, the gods have spoken again. They are angry, very angry. Queen Ifeoma's barrenness is not natural, it is a curse. The gods do not want her to bear children. They will not permit it as long as she remains your only wife. King Ebube's jaw tightened. What are you saying? You must take a second wife. For the kingdom, for your legacy, for the very survival of your lineage. If you die without an heir, this kingdom will fall into chaos, civil war, bloodshed. Is that what you want? The king closed his eyes. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier. And if I refuse? Then you condemn your people to disaster. Is your love for one woman worth the destruction of thousands? The chief priest's voice was smooth as oil, poisonous as nightshade. That night, King Ebube could not sleep. He paced his chambers, wrestling with his conscience, his love, and his duty. Near midnight, he walked to the highest point of the palace and looked out over his kingdom. Cooking fires flickered in the darkness like fallen stars. These were his people. They depended on him. They trusted him. But how could he betray Ifeoma, the woman who had stood by him through every trial, who loved him when he was still a prince with uncertain prospects, who had never once complained about her condition, though he knew it broke her heart daily? As if summoned by his thoughts, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Ifeoma stood there in her night wrapper, her eyes swollen from crying. You haven't slept, she said softly. Neither have you. They stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them like a heavy cloud. Finally, Ifeoma moved closer and took his hands in hers. They were trembling. My king, my husband, my love, she began, her voice breaking. I release you. Ifeoma? No. Please. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Let me say this before my courage fails. I have been selfish. I have held on to you with both hands while the kingdom suffers. Every night I pray to the gods. Take me instead. Let me die so you can marry another and have the sons you deserve. But the gods won't even grant me that mercy. Don't speak like this. The king pulled her into his arms, and they both wept. You must take another wife, Ifeoma whispered against his chest. The fate of the kingdom is more important than our love. It is selfish of me to keep you bound to a barren woman. What kind of queen am I if I cannot give you an heir? What kind of wife if I would let our people suffer for my sake? They held each other and wept until dawn broke over the kingdom, marking the end of their exclusive bond and the beginning of a new, painful chapter. The next morning, when the chief priest arrived for the monthly ritual, King Ebube stopped him before he could leave. "Oracle," the king said, his voice heavy with resignation, "I have made my decision. I will take a second wife." The chief priest's eyes flashed with barely concealed excitement. "The gods be praised, your majesty. This is wisdom. I will consult the oracle immediately to determine which woman the gods have chosen for you." That night, under the Iroko tree, the chief priest and Madame Nne celebrated like thieves, dividing stolen gold. "It is done," the chief priest laughed. "Our plan has worked perfectly. That portion I give Queen Ifeoma monthly. It has kept her barren all these years. The king suspects nothing. In 1 week's time, your daughter Uloma will become queen." Nne danced in the moonlight. "Finally, my daughter will wear the crown. My grandchildren will rule this kingdom. We will have wealth, power, everything." But that same night, something stirred in Queen Ifeoma's spirit. As she prepared to take the chief priest's portion, the blessing, she had faithfully consumed every month for 7 years, her hand paused. The liquid looked the same, dark, bitter-smelling, with herbs floating in it. But something felt wrong. A voice, quiet as a whisper, seemed to speak in her heart. "Do not drink it." Ifeoma looked at the portion, then at the window where moonlight streamed in. After all, she thought, what difference would it make now? She was already disadvantaged, already being replaced. The king was taking a second wife. What harm in stopping the portion now? She poured it out the window and watched it seep into the earth. She did the same the next night and the next. For the first time in 7 years, Queen Ifeoma's body was free from the poison that had kept her womb closed. The wedding day arrived with all the pageantry and ceremony expected of a royal occasion, but none of the joy. The entire community gathered in the palace courtyard, where drummers played and dancers performed. But the celebration felt hollow, forced. Queen Ifeoma stood in her chambers, trembling, as her handmaidens brought in Uloma's bridal attire for final preparation. Custom dictated that the first wife must help prepare the second wife, a tradition meant to show acceptance and unity. Ifeoma's hands shook as she held the beautiful coral beads that would adorn Uloma's neck. Each bead felt like a stone in her hand, each thread of the ceremonial wrapper like a rope binding her own heart. "My queen," one of the younger maids whispered, seeing Ifeoma's tears. "You don't have to." "I do," Ifeoma said firmly, though her voice cracked. "I am still queen. I will honor our traditions." When Uloma entered the chamber, beautiful and young, Ifeoma had to steady herself against the wall. This girl, barely 20, would share her husband's bed tonight. Would perhaps give him the children she could not. "My queen," Uloma said with false sweetness, bowing slightly. But Ifeoma saw the triumph in her eyes, the barely concealed smirk. With trembling fingers, Ifeoma fastened the coral beads around Uloma's neck. Each bead clicked into place like a nail in a coffin. When she placed the final golden crown on Uloma's head, a single tear dropped onto the younger woman's shoulder. "Congratulations," Ifeoma whispered. "May the gods grant you all that I could not give him." The ceremony was quick and quiet, as the king had insisted. He could barely look at Uloma during the rites. His eyes kept drifting to where Ifeoma stood, draped in white, her face a mask of composure that hid an ocean of pain. When the rituals were complete and the guests had eaten and drunk their fill, the king retired to his chambers alone. He refused to touch his new wife that night, or the next, or the night after that. Queen Uloma fumed. Her mother, Nne, stormed to her daughter's chambers. "What is happening? Why hasn't he called for you?" "He still loves her," Uloma spat. "He can barely stand to look at me." "Give him time," Nne said, though worry creased her face. "The chief priest assures me Ifeoma can never conceive. Eventually, the king will come to you." And after a week of mourning his lost, exclusive bond with Ifeoma, King Ebube finally summoned Queen Uloma to his chambers. He fulfilled his duty as a husband, though his heart was not in it. But that same week, something miraculous was happening. The king, unable to bear the sadness in Ifeoma's eyes, had gone to her chambers 2 nights before the wedding. They had held each other and made love one final time, not as king and queen, but as the young lovers they once were, clinging to each other as their exclusive world crumbled around them. Neither of them knew that in that moment of grief and love combined, a seed had been planted, a seed that would grow into a miracle that would shake the kingdom to its foundations. 2 months passed. Queen Uloma began to feel ill in the mornings. She smiled secretly to herself. It was happening, she was with child. Soon she would give the king his heir, and Ifeoma would be forgotten forever. But when the palace physician examined both queens as part of the monthly health ritual, his face showed confusion, then shock. "Your Majesty," the physician said, kneeling before the king in his private chamber, "I have news. Both queens are with child." The king stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. "What did you say?" "Queen Uloma is pregnant, as expected. But, Your Majesty, Queen Ifeoma is also pregnant, about 2 months along." The news exploded through the palace like lightning through a dry forest. Within hours, the entire kingdom knew the barren queen was barren no more. In his shrine, the chief priest stumbled backward, knocking over clay pots and sacred objects. "Impossible! Impossible!" He grabbed fistfuls of his hair. "My portion! It should have worked! How?" Madame Azin burst into the shrine, her face twisted with rage and fear. "You fool! You said she could never conceive! You promised me!" "She must have stopped taking the portion." The chief priest paced frantically, his mind racing. "But when? How long ago? What do we do now?" Azin's voice rose to a shriek. The chief priest's eyes narrowed, calculating. "Don't panic. Remember the law. The first queen to bear a son will be the mother of the next king. There's still a chance. We must pray that Ifeoma bears a daughter, or," he paused, a dark thought crossing his face, "or we ensure that her child does not survive." "You cannot kill a child in the womb," Azin hissed. "The gods would surely punish us." "Then we wait," the chief priest said coldly. "We wait and see which child comes first, and which child is male. The game is not over yet." The months passed slowly, each day heavy with anticipation. Queen Ifeoma's pregnancy progressed smoothly, while Queen Uloma's was more difficult. She was often ill and irritable. In the 7th month of Ifeoma's pregnancy, she went into early labor. The palace erupted in controlled chaos as midwives rushed to her chambers, and the king paced outside like a caged leopard. In his shrine, the chief priest lit candles and began making dark incantations. He called upon spirits of death, upon forces that claimed children before they could draw breath. His voice rose and fell in ancient, forbidden languages as he commanded the child in Ifeoma's womb to die. But no matter how loudly he chanted, no matter how many sacrifices he made, the spirits would not obey. Something stronger protected that child, something the chief priest's dark powers could not overcome. Inside the chamber, Queen Ifeoma screamed one final time, and then a baby's cry. "It's a boy!" the head midwife shouted. "A strong, healthy boy." The king burst into the room, tears streaming down his face. He fell to his knees beside Ifeoma's bed, where she lay exhausted but radiant, holding their son. "My love," he whispered, kissing her forehead, her hands, her tears. "You did it. You gave us a son." "We did it," she corrected, smiling through her exhaustion. "The gods finally heard my prayers. They named him Chike, God's power, for surely it was divine power that had finally opened Ifeoma's womb after 7 years of barrenness. The entire kingdom celebrated for 7 days. Drums beat, dancers filled the streets, and people praised the gods for blessing their beloved first queen with a son. But in the shadows, 3 people did not celebrate. The chief priest, Madame Azin, and Queen Uloma gathered in secret, their faces masks of rage and frustration. "The first son," Azin spat, "he will be the next king." Unless, the chief priest said slowly, something happens to him. 2 weeks later, Queen Uloma also gave birth to a boy. They named him Emeka, Great Deeds. But everyone knew that despite his name, Chike was the rightful heir. The years passed, and the two princes grew up together in the palace, as different as sun and shadow. Prince Chike grew into a young man of remarkable character. He was calm, humble, and gentle, but also courageous and wise beyond his years. He treated everyone with equal respect, from the highest noble to the lowest servant. He would sit with the elderly and listen to their stories, play with the children in the village square, and help farmers carry heavy loads from the fields. The people loved him deeply. That is a king, they would say when he passed. That is a ruler who will lead with his heart. Prince Emeka, in contrast, grew proud and entitled. He was not cruel, but he was careless. Careless with his words, with people's feelings, with the responsibilities given to him. His mother, Uloma, doted on him excessively, always reminding him that he deserved to be king, that he was being cheated of his birthright. You are just as much the king's son as Chike, she would whisper to him. Why should you be second just because his mother was first? You deserve the throne. These poisonous words sank deep into young Emeka's heart, though he loved his older brother and felt guilty for the jealousy that sometimes flared in his chest. As the princes entered their 20th year, King Abube's health began to decline. The cough that had bothered him for months grew worse. He became frail, spending more time in bed than in the throne room. One evening, Prince Chike sat by his father's bedside, holding the king's hand. My son, the king said weakly, soon you will be king. But listen to me carefully. He gripped Chike's hand with surprising strength. The throne is not a seat of power, it is a burden of service. You will face betrayals you cannot imagine, from places you never expect. But always remember, truth is stronger than lies, and justice is more powerful than revenge. Father, don't speak of death. You will recover. No, my son, I feel my time ending, but I am not afraid. I am leaving the kingdom in good hands. The king coughed, and Chike helped him drink water. There is something else. Be careful of those closest to the throne. Sometimes the greatest danger comes not from enemies outside, but from vipers within. Chike didn't fully understand his father's warning then. He should have. In a dark corner of the kingdom, under the same Iroko tree where their conspiracy had begun 20 years ago, 3 figures met once again. The king is dying, Mademoiselle said urgently. When he dies, Chike will be crowned. We will lose everything. Not if Chike disappears first, the chief priest said coldly. Queen Uloma gasped. You mean kill him? I mean make him disappear in a way that no one can blame us. Make it look like an accident, a tragedy, an act of the gods themselves. How? Uloma asked, her voice barely a whisper. The chief priest smiled his snake smile. Prince Chike goes fishing every Saturday evening at the great river. It is his custom, his time of peace. He always goes alone in his canoe, with only guards watching from the bank. What if the river spirits were to claim him? The marine kingdom, Ezine breathed. You can summon them? For the right price, I can summon anything, the chief priest boasted. This Friday night, I will perform the ritual. I will call upon the water spirits to drag Prince Chike into the deep when he fishes on Saturday. His body will never be found. It will be a tragic accident, and with no heir, the throne will pass to Emeka. But the oath, Uloma said nervously. The law says all royal family members must swear at the Iroko tree when someone disappears mysteriously. The gods will judge us. The chief priest laughed. The gods? I speak for the gods. I control the rituals. Don't worry about the oath. We will be fine. Trust me. The 3 conspirators clasped hands in the darkness, sealing their evil pact. They did not know that the very spirits they planned to summon were listening. They did not know that the gods they thought they controlled were preparing their own judgment. Friday night came wrapped in an unnatural darkness. No stars shone, no moon gave light. The chief priest made his way to the riverbank, carrying a gourd filled with blood, palm wine, and ground bones. He stood at the water's edge and began his incantations, his voice rising and falling in inhuman rhythms. He poured the mixture into the water and called out in a language older than the kingdom itself. "Spirits of the deep, guardians of the marine kingdom, I offer you blood and wine. I offer you honor and sacrifice. Tomorrow, when Prince Chike comes to this water, when his canoe floats upon your domain, I ask you to claim him, drag him into your depths, take him to the land of the dead. Do this, and I will serve you for all my remaining days." The water began to bubble and swirl. Though there was no wind, something ancient stirred in the depths. The chief priest smiled in triumph and hurried away. But he did not see what happened next. As his footsteps faded, the water's surface calmed. Then a figure rose from the river, not human, not quite spirit, but something in between. This was Nne Mmiri, the mother of waters, ancient guardian of the river kingdom. She looked toward the palace where Prince Chike slept peacefully, unaware of the danger awaiting him. She felt the purity of his spirit, the goodness of his heart, and she made a decision that would change everything. "The chief priest calls upon us to take an innocent life," she said to the spirits gathered around her, "but we are not servants of evil. Tomorrow, when the prince comes to the water, we will not take his life. Instead, we will take him to a place between worlds to teach him, to protect him, and to expose the evil that seeks his death. The gods have a plan for this young man. Let us help them fulfill it." Saturday evening arrived bright and peaceful. Prince Chike walked to the riverbank, his fishing gear slung over his shoulder. His mother, Queen Ifeoma, had felt uneasy all day, a mother's instinct warning her of danger, but she said nothing. She didn't want to seem overprotective. "Be careful, my son," she said, embracing him tightly. "Mother, I do this every week." Chike laughed gently, kissing her forehead. "I will return before sunset with fish for dinner, I promise." That promise would not be kept. At the river, Prince Chike instructed his guards to remain on the bank as usual. "Stay here and rest. I will call if I need you." He pushed his canoe into the water and paddled to his favorite spot, where the fish were always plentiful. The water was calm, the sky clear, everything seemed perfect. Chike lowered his hook into the water and began to hum a tune his mother had taught him as a child. For a few minutes, all was peace. Then the water stirred. It started subtly small ripples that grew into waves. The sky, so clear moments before, suddenly darkened. Wind came from nowhere, howling across the water like a wounded animal. "My prince!" the guard shouted from the shore. "Come back! A storm!" But it was no natural storm. The water beneath Chike's canoe began to spin, creating a whirlpool that pulled him toward the center of the river. He grabbed his paddle and fought against the current, his muscles straining, but it was like fighting against the hands of giants. The guards ran into the shallows, trying to reach him, but an invisible force held them back. They could not enter the water. They could only watch in horror as the prince's canoe spun faster and faster. "Help!" one guard screamed toward the village. "The prince is drowning! Help!" Prince Chike felt the canoe tipping. He knew he was going to fall in. In his last moment above water, he looked toward the shore and saw his guards reaching helplessly for him. He thought of his mother, his father, his kingdom. Then the water claimed him. He fell into darkness, the cold river swallowing him whole. He sank, down and down, expecting his lungs to burn, expecting to drown, but instead something miraculous happened. He could breathe. The water around him glowed with a soft, ethereal light. He was no longer sinking but floating, suspended in a world between worlds. And then he saw them spirits. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, their forms shimmering like light on water. One spirit approached him, more solid than the others. She was beautiful, and terrible at once, with eyes older than time itself. "Prince Chike," she said, and her voice was like water over stones. "I am Nne Mmiri, mother of waters. Do not be afraid." "Am I dead?" Chike asked, his voice strangely clear in this underwater realm. "No, child. You are protected. The chief priest sent us to kill you, but we do not obey the commands of evil men. The gods have a purpose for you, and we will help fulfill it." "The chief priest? But why?" "There is much evil in your kingdom, young prince. Evil that wears the mask of righteousness. We will keep you here for a time, in safety, while that evil exposes itself. When the time is right, you will return to your people. But for now, trust in the gods, trust in justice, and trust that truth always rises to the surface, no matter how deep it has been buried." On the riverbank, chaos had erupted. The guards who had witnessed the prince's disappearance ran back to the palace, their voices hoarse from screaming. "The prince! The prince is gone! The water took him!" Queen Ifeoma was in her garden when she heard the commotion. She dropped the flowers she was holding and ran, her heart already knowing before her mind could accept it. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, no." She reached the river just as the king's fastest runners were spreading the news throughout the kingdom. The water was calm now, innocent looking. Only the prince's canoe floated on the surface, empty, rocking gently, as if mocking their grief. "Chike!" Ifeoma screamed, running into the water. Guards had to physically restrain her. My son! My son! Chike!" Her screams could be heard throughout the village, a mother's agony that made even the hardest warriors weep. King Abube arrived, barely able to walk, supported by servants. When he saw the empty canoe, his legs gave out. He collapsed at the water's edge, calling his son's name over and over. "Summon every swimmer in the kingdom," he commanded. "Offer gold, land, anything. Find my son. Find him now." Within the hour, dozens of the kingdom's strongest swimmers dove into the river, searching desperately. They dove again and again until exhaustion claimed them, but there was no sign of Prince Chike. No body, no clothing, nothing. By nightfall, the entire kingdom was in mourning. People wept openly in the streets. The palace drummers beat slow, mournful rhythms. Queen Ifeoma could not be consoled. She sat by the river all night, staring at the water, calling her son's name. In her chambers, Queen Uloma put on a mask of grief, but in her heart, she felt relief. "It worked," she whispered to her mother when they were alone. "He's gone." "Don't celebrate yet," Izine warned. "The oath is coming. We must be careful." The next day, King Ibube summoned the chief priest. "Speak to the water spirits," he commanded, his voice broken. "Beg them to release my son's body. We need to bury him. We need closure." The chief priest performed elaborate rituals at the river's edge, chanting and dancing, throwing sacred objects into the water. But nothing happened. No body appeared. "The spirits have taken him completely, Your Majesty," the chief priest said with false sadness. "He belongs to the water kingdom now." 1 week after the prince's disappearance, the king summoned the council of elders to his chambers. "I invoke the ancient law," he said, his voice weak but firm. "When a member of the royal family dies or disappears under mysterious circumstances, all royals and the chief priest must swear the oath of thunder before the sacred Iroko tree, witnessed by the entire kingdom. The gods will judge the guilty." The elders nodded gravely. It was an old law, rarely invoked, but absolute. The oath of thunder had never failed to expose guilt. "It will be done on the next Iket market day, in 4 days' time," the king announced. "Spread the word. Every person in the kingdom must attend." When Queen Uloma heard this, fear gripped her heart. "Mother, the oath!" she whispered frantically. "What if the thunder really does strike?" "It won't," Azina assured her, though her own hands trembled. "The chief priest says we'll be fine. He controls the rituals. Trust him." But the chief priest himself was less certain. Alone in his shrine that night, He performed protective spells and cleansing rituals, trying to shield himself from divine judgment. It was just one prince, he muttered to himself. Just one life. Surely the gods will understand. I've served them for decades. They won't abandon me now. He was very, very wrong. The Eket market day arrived under a clear blue sky. But as the morning progressed, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, rolling in like an approaching army. Every person in the kingdom converged on the village square, where the ancient Iroko tree stood, the same tree where the conspirators had plotted their evil. The tree was massive, its branches spreading like protective arms, its trunk thick enough that 10 men couldn't wrap their arms around it. It had stood for over 500 years, witnessing countless oaths, judgments, and ceremonies. The crowd was silent as King Ebube, leaning heavily on a walking staff, approached the tree. He raised his right hand, his voice carrying across the square. I stand before this sacred tree, before my people, and before the gods themselves. If I know anything about what happened to Prince Chike, if I had any hand in his disappearance, may thunder strike me dead where I stand. His voice echoed across the silent crowd. Everyone held their breath. The clouds overhead rumbled softly, but nothing happened. The king lowered his hand and stepped aside, his innocence confirmed. Next came Queen Ifeoma. She walked slowly to the tree, her face pale and drawn. She had barely eaten or slept since her son's disappearance. Her once vibrant eyes were now hollow with grief. She raised her trembling hand and spoke, her voice breaking. I stand before this sacred tree, before my people, and before the gods who have already taken so much from me. If I know anything about what happened to my son, my Chike, my only child, if I had any hand in his disappearance, her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. May thunder strike me dead. Take me instead. I beg you, gods, take me and return my son. The crowd wept with her. Even the hardest men wiped their eyes, but the sky remained still. Queen Ifeoma was innocent, though her grief was so profound that many wondered if she would survive it. She stumbled away from the tree, and her handmaidens caught her before she collapsed. The moment had come. Queen Uloma stepped forward. She wore white, as was customary for the oath, but her hands were clenched so tightly that her nails drew blood from her palms. Sweat beaded on her forehead, despite the cool morning air. As she walked toward the tree, her steps faltered. Madame Ezina watched from the crowd, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The chief priest stood with the other priests, his face a carefully composed mask, but his eyes were wide with barely concealed fear. Queen Uloma reached the tree and raised her hand. Her voice came out thin and high. I stand before this sacred tree, before my people, and before the gods. If I know what happened to Prince Chike, may thunder strike me. For a moment, one terrible, suspended moment, nothing happened. Some villagers began to nod. She is innocent, someone whispered. The gods have judged her pure, another said. Queen Uloma's face began to relax. She had done it. The oath was complete. She turned to walk away, relief flooding through her body. Then the sky split open, crack. The sound was deafening, like the world itself breaking in half. A bolt of lightning, thicker than a man's body, blazed down from the heavens with blinding intensity. It struck Queen Uloma with such force that she was lifted off her feet and thrown backward. The smell of burnt flesh and ozone filled the air. Uloma's body convulsed violently on the ground, smoke rising from her skin. Her eyes rolled back in her head, her mouth open in a silent scream. She was alive, but barely unconscious, her body twitching uncontrollably. The crowd gasped and screamed, people falling backward in shock and terror. And then, something even more shocking happened. Ha 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 ha! Iki ki ki ki! The chief priest suddenly burst into wild, insane laughter. He ran forward, scratching his head violently, his eyes rolling in different directions. We did it! We did it! I was involved! I called the water spirits. I summoned them to take the prince. He danced in circles, pulling at his ritual beads, his voice rising to a shriek. The Marine Kingdom, I sent them. It was me. It was all me. The gods had struck him with madness. His punishment was not death, but the humiliation of confessing his own evil while unable to control his own mouth. No! Madame Azina screamed from the crowd, clawing at her own face. The gods! The gods see everything! They know! They know! She fell to her knees, weeping and wailing, her mind also touched by divine madness. The entire village square erupted in chaos. People were shouting, crying, pointing at the three guilty parties. Guards rushed forward to restrain the chief priest, who was still laughing and confessing, unable to stop himself. King Ebube stood frozen, unable to process what he was witnessing. These people he had trusted for decades, had murdered his son? Queen Ifeoma let out a sound that wasn't quite human, a mother's anguish-given voice. She lunged toward the chief priest, but guards held her back as she screamed, "You killed my son! You killed my baby!" And then, through all the chaos and screaming and madness, a voice rang out. Clear, strong, impossible. I am alive. Every head turned. The chaos stopped, as if someone had frozen time itself. There, walking through the crowd, was Prince Chike. He was real, solid, alive. His clothes were dry, his face peaceful, and around him seemed to shimmer a faint light, as if he carried some of the spirit world with him. Chike! Queen Ifeoma broke free from the guards and ran to her son. She crashed into him with such force they both nearly fell. She touched his face, his arms, his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "You're alive! You're real! My son! My son!" The king stumbled forward, leaning heavily on his staff, tears pouring down his weathered face. "My son," he whispered. "My boy." The entire village erupted in jubilation. People were crying, shouting, dancing. The drummers began to beat joyful rhythms. Children ran through the square laughing. Prince Chike embraced his parents, holding them both as they wept. Then he turned to face the crowd, and a hush fell over them. "My people," he said, his voice carrying authority and wisdom that hadn't been there before. "I have returned from a place between worlds. The water spirits did not kill me, though they were commanded to by the chief priest. Instead, they protected me. They took me to their kingdom beneath the river, where I have been safe and cared for." He pointed to the chief priest, who was now weeping and gibbering on the ground. This man, who claimed to speak for the gods, spoke only for his own greed. He and Queen Uloma and her mother conspired to end my life so that Prince Emeka could take the throne. They called upon dark spirits and made evil bargains. The crowd murmured in anger and disgust. "But the gods see everything," Chike continued, "and the water spirits, whom this man thought he controlled, chose instead to serve justice. They kept me safe. They fed me food that tasted like honey and light. They taught me secrets of leadership and wisdom. And they told me that when the time was right, when the evil had exposed itself, I would return." Do you find this story interesting? Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you. He walked toward the Iroko tree and placed his hand on its ancient bark. The oath of thunder does not lie. The gods do not lie. Truth always rises to the surface, no matter how deep it has been buried. From his pocket, he pulled out a strange shell, luminescent, like nothing found in earthly waters. "The Mother of Waters, Nne Mmiri, gave me this as proof of where I have been, and as a symbol of divine protection. She said to tell my people, the gods favor the righteous, and they punish the wicked. Always choose truth over lies, justice over revenge, and mercy over cruelty." King Ebube approached his son and embraced him again. "You have been tested by the gods themselves and found worthy," he said, his voice thick with emotion and pride. "You are truly ready to be king." The crowd roared its approval. The fate of the conspirators was decided by the Council of Elders, with input from the king and Prince Chike himself. Queen Uloma survived the lightning strike but was permanently scarred both her body and her mind. She was stripped of her title and exiled to a distant village, where she would live out her days in disgrace and obscurity. her madness coming and going like terrible waves. Mademoiselle was also exiled, sent to the same village to care for her daughter. The woman who had schemed for power and wealth ended her days in poverty and shame, her name becoming a cautionary tale told to greedy children. The chief priest was stripped of his position, and his shrine was burned to the ground. He was locked in a special compound where those touched by divine madness were kept, where he spent his remaining days alternating between lucid moments of deep regret and episodes of wild confession, unable to ever escape the truth of what he had done. Prince Emeka, who had known nothing of the conspiracy, was allowed to remain in the palace. Prince Chike refused to punish his younger brother for their mother's sins. "He is innocent," Chike declared, "and he is still my brother. A kingdom that punishes children for their parents' crimes is no kingdom at all." This act of mercy won Chike even more admiration from the people. 3 months after the dramatic oath ceremony, King Ebube passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his family. He died content, knowing his kingdom would be in good hands. Prince Chike was crowned King Chike the Wise at a ceremony attended by people from kingdoms far and wide, all curious to see the prince who had returned from the land of spirits. One of his first acts as king was to reform the position of chief priest. No longer would one person hold such unchecked spiritual power. Instead, a council of priests would serve, checking and balancing each other, ensuring that no one could use religion as a weapon for personal gain. He also established a new tradition. Every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance and return, the kingdom would gather at the river to give thanks to the water spirits and to remember that truth always triumphs over lies, no matter how powerful the liars. Queen Ifeoma lived many more years, finally at peace, watching her son rule with wisdom and justice. She never forgot the years of suffering, the barrenness, the betrayal, the brief, terrible belief that her son was dead. But she also never forgot the joy of miraculous conception and the impossible blessing of her son's return from the waters. "The gods test us," she would tell young mothers who came to her with their own struggles. "They test us severely sometimes, but they never abandon the righteous. Hold on to hope, even when hope seems impossible. Hold on to truth, even when lies seem more comfortable. The gods are watching, and they keep accounts that never fade." As for King Chike, he ruled for many decades, becoming one of the greatest kings in the kingdom's history. He was known for his wisdom, his justice, and his mercy. But he was most remembered for the luminescent shell he kept on a cord around his neck, a constant reminder that he had been touched by the divine, protected by the water spirits, and given a second chance to serve his people. And every time someone asked him about the shell, he would tell them the story of conspiracy and divine justice, of a mother's love and a kingdom's faith, of truth buried deep but always rising to the surface. "Remember," he would say, touching the shell, "the gods are always watching, and the water always remembers." Did this story touch your heart? Did the moment when Queen Ifeoma held her returned son make you emotional? Did the thunder striking Queen Uloma give you chills? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which moment affected you most? And don't forget to subscribe and share this story with others who need to remember that truth always triumphs in the end. The gods are watching, and justice never sleeps. The water always remembers, and truth always rises to the surface.